All right, it's that time, so I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome. This is Data Literacy 101, laying the cornerstone for future success. So this is just kind of one part of our data literacy teams, our data treat teams approach to data literacy. We have a lot of different things going on, and I won't repeat everything because Shelley actually did a really nice presentation yesterday, and hopefully y'all are able to see it. But if not, I encourage you to watch the recording. It talks about all the different initiatives that we have going on to kind of reinforce and help build up some data literacy within Ed+, but then hopefully, throughout the entire university. But for this one right now, we have courses that we are creating, so data literacy modules. They will be both live and self-paced. And optimally, it's still in development right now, but there will be 5 generic, so data literacy that can be applied anywhere, in ASU, within different departments of ASU, outside of ASU, within real life, and then 1 Ed+ specific module, just because Ed+ tends to have things that are unique to Ed+ just based on our student population. So we'll have an Ed+ specific module that will kind of focus in on that. But this here is going to be module 1. So as we go through, if y'all want to take some notes and share what your thoughts are, that would be really pretty great. Like I said, this is still in development here. And I would appreciate good, positive feedback, negative feedback. If you see something that you really like, let me know. If you see something that you're like, I don't know about that, or that wasn't clear, let me know as well. We have a focus group, and that's our Slack channel, Ed+ Data Focus. It's not a big commitment. In fact, it could be no commitment if you wanted. You can just join the Slack channel, and you can contribute as much or as little as you want. We'll post videos, we'll post things for y'all to kind of look over, terms if you like the definition or if you don't, even from the aspect of, I'm still not clearly sure what this means. Any kind of level that you can contribute at would be wonderful. So please consider, and definitely consider giving me feedback after the end of this as well. Okay, so our live course overview. So we will do, like I said, 5 kind of generic courses and 1 Ed+ specific one. So this first one is Data Literacy in You, and that's the course that you are in right now, participating in. The next one would be Ins and Outs of Data. That's things like data storage. So where do we keep our data? Data quality. So how do we get from something that's just like a survey to something that we can actually use? And then the data life cycle, which how do you get from raw data that hasn't been sorted or filtered or cleaned up any, to the end process where maybe you're presenting something to leadership and they're making decisions off of it. So how does that data kind of go from start to finish? The next one would be data usage. So we'll talk about descriptive and predictive analytics. These are important so that way the 2 kind of main types of analytics that are out there as far as we're concerned, and what to anticipate and what to expect whenever you ask for some analytics. Are you in the descriptive or the predictive mode? And we'll talk in more detail about that. We'll talk about mean, median, and mode, which I taught 5th grade. I know that was probably maybe the last time y'all have ever heard of mean, median, mode. So we'll go over a nice friendly, reminder of all of that. We'll talk about Excel in one of our modules, basic Excel. We're not going to get into, really complicated formulas. We'll talk basic formulas, pivot tables, pivot charts, just essentially how to manipulate your data and make it do what you want on a pretty simple level. We'll go into storytelling with data. So now that you have all this data, you know where it's come from, you know how to get it. Now, how do you effectively present that to the powers that be to help them make decisions and help kind of guide your department or your group or your person into the right decision? And then, of course, the Ed+ specific data. So the goal for the course, as far as Ed+ data treat is concerned, is to give people the skills to be able to know how to request data, so how to read that data, and then how to actually use the data effectively. And so you might think, okay, what would be my goals for the course? You're not taking the whole module or the whole course right now, but you might consider what would my goals be for that course, or what could my team's goal be for that course? What do I want my people to get out of it? And kind of keep that in the back of your brain as we go through this, because if you feel like maybe this course won't hit that, let me know, because we're, like I said, still in the development mode and we can adjust and pivot and make changes as needed. Okay, so at Ed Plus, of course, we want y'all to be comfortable stepping outside your comfort zone. So if you're here in this room, you obviously want to be here. But, if this was a training that somebody had to go through, some people might walk in thinking, I don't even know why I need to be here. And so we want to encourage people to kind of step out of that comfort zone and be encouraged to ask questions. When I taught my kids, I encourage them to question me. Don't just accept things at face value. If you hear something and you're not sure about it, question it. Question where I'm getting my data from, because that's all part of data literacy, right? Is being able to know where your data is from and not just blindly accepting things. So question things as we go through, and don't be afraid to apply some of these strategies. If I tell you in the thing to question where it comes from, and don't be afraid to apply it to me and say, okay, well, where's that data coming from? So please use this and apply what you've learned, and don't be afraid to question and ask comments. I used to tell my kids, speak into the void. So you don't have to raise your hand but speak into the silence. If you're like, I don't know about that, or can you explain, just ask. You don't have to raise your hand. We're no longer fifth graders. Okay, so in module 1, these are the kind of the topics that we want to hit to make sure that we cover by the end of this specific module within this hour. We want to make sure that we're clear on what data literacy means, how to define data literacy. We want to talk about where data is found, both inside and outside of ASU, because data literacy is not a work thing. It can be, it's a part of work, but it's also an outside of work thing. It's a life thing at this point. We'll talk about some data specific terminology. Just like with any fields, there's special terms that you're going to hear that may be a familiar word, but definitely not a familiar definition. In the medical field, there's tons of analogies, or not analogies, acronyms. Thank you. Acronyms. And we don't really have as many acronyms as I would say, but there are plenty of terms that you go, oh, I know what that is. And then you realize that maybe in the data realm, you don't necessarily, because the term or the definition is different. So we'll go over some of those. And then we'll give an overview of those descriptive and predictive analytics, just a very broad overview of that. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty on this. Okay, so the first question we're going to cover is, how is data literacy relevant to me and my needs, both inside and outside of work? So y'all are welcome to do the QR code and enter in your answers if you want to. No need for that. In the live course, we would certainly do this, but for y'all, I'll give y'all a pass. So when someone says data, what are you envisioning? Like, what comes to mind when somebody says data? And then also consider, what does it mean to be data literate? And then who should be data literate? Is that something that is specific to data analysts, data scientists, or is that something that, we should drop down to kindergarten? I mean, it's just something to consider. What does that data literacy mean? And then who should it apply to? So when I think about data literacy, I like to think about it in the terms of like reading literacy, like, the literacy that we're normally used to talking about. If you have a fifth grader who can't read college level text, you're not calling that fifth grader illiterate. But are they as literate as a college level student? Well, no. Well, that's because data literacy and literacy in general is a spectrum. Your tiny kids are going to start off being able to recognize a letter. Then they're going to be able to say what that letter is. Then they're going to be able to say what the sound is. And so they build skills upon each other. And the same applies for data literacy as well. Those skills build upon each other. You're not expected to be able to create your own data from the get-go. And that's a part of data literacy, but that is not the data literacy. There is no the data literacy. You grow and you develop skills as you go along. But on the other hand, there are also obstacles that prevent people from gaining those skills. And some of them are self-imposed, some of them are environmental. It just kind of depends on where you're at in your data literacy plan, right? You might be in here and being like, why do I even need to know this? Probably not, because you're all here voluntarily, but you can also be like, okay, that's really cool. I see the value, but I don't even know the next step. Or you could even be like, got it. I know how to read these graphs. So now what do I do with this? I mean, great, but now what? And all those are valid, legitimate obstacles that hopefully we can kind of help y'all overcome, or at least point you in the right direction or to the right person to help you kind of find your path through those obstacles, if not solve them. So consider your own obstacles and frustrations. Once again, you could do the QR code if you wanted to, but consider your own obstacles and frustrations. ET, which was once UTO, has this really nice questionnaire that helps you kind of figure out what your data citizen level is at. So what your data persona is. Are you starting out, or are you, top of your class? And these are the different personas that they have up there. And you can take that quiz. I will send out this slide set so y'all can find that questionnaire if y'all would like to take it. But the first one is your data citizen. And all that is that you are using reports that are already made. You're just taking them as is. Some people may not even be there, and that's cool. You're still kind of grouped in that data citizen realm. The next one would be data apprentice. So you're using these dashboards and reports, but you might tweak them a little bit to make them fit your needs. You might apply filters. You might do a little bit of playing around with them. Data knights, these are people that are now starting to create their own analysis. They're grabbing tables, they're doing things, they're making their own, maybe not dashboards, but data sets. And then you have data wizards who are, the data ninjas, right? They're the top of cream of the crop. They're the ones that are grabbing that raw data. They're creating tables from which people create data sets. They might be doing predictive analyses on things. So they're, top of the class there. And so the goal for us is to get you either to the data citizen realm where you actually know where this data is coming from and you can, use it, or even hopefully push some of y'all to that data apprentice where y'all can take some of this data, tweak it, and make it your own. Now, if y'all want to go further and beyond, by all means, eventually the goal is for us to have even more advanced modules and more advanced courses, but we're still, working on our first level here. Okay, so why data literacy? And I was thinking, having all this data is great. I mean, my job is to provide data, but if people don't know that it even exists, then that's hard to share. It's hard to share that information. I mean, you could live in the Library of Alexandria, but if you don't know how to read, or if you can't absorb the information from those books, you might as well be in a desert. So if you have all this data in your fingertips and you don't even know it exists, then what's the point? So that's the whole goal of this data literacy course, is to, number one, let you know it's out there. There's data out there. And with the other initiatives that we're working on with term of the week, tip of the month, data and dessert, letting you know what data exists, and then giving you the confidence and the capability to know where it's coming from, why it looks the way it does, and what I can do with it to be able to make it work for me. And then how to tell others about it, so that way your work is effective and is helpful to others. So thinking about data, where do you see data outside of work? So not necessarily in ASU, but outside of ASU. And think about what ways data affects your everyday life. Data doesn't have to be a thing. It doesn't have to be a data point. It doesn't have to be a thing in a table. It doesn't have to be a graph. Humans constantly find and store data points. We like patterns. That's why we see faces in the fronts of cars, and we see the man we see patterns. We like to see patterns. And so as you find those patterns, you are storing them in your head, whether or not you know about it. I would joke, my husband jokes with me, he'll come to bed late and I'll ask him the next morning. I was like, what time do you come to bed? He goes, why is it for your Excel spreadsheet? No, but I am keeping kind of a running record in my head. I'm like, hey, you've been to bed really late. Do we need to adjust something? So you keep data points, but it doesn't have to be a number, right? So consider this. y'all all know companies use our data. That is nothing new. Facebook knows who to suggest for your friends, and they can suggest people that you hadn't thought about in 20 years. And you go, oh man, I forgot that person even exists. And yet Facebook knows. But when I send you this slide deck, or if you decide to search on your own, totally click on that Target link. So Target had gotten so good at reading the data that humans, their shoppers, present, that they were creeping people out, to be honest. So at one point, Target was collecting this data, and they could tell by what women were purchasing at certain times how long they were in their pregnancy. So if they were purchasing lots of unscented items, then that grouped in this little section that they knew that they were X number of months along. And so what happened, Forbes was writing this article, and a dad called his local Target really upset that his high school age daughter, was getting Target ads for baby items. And he's like, why are you promoting this? This is not right. And of course, the poor Target local guy had no idea what he was talking about, but he apologized. And but 2 weeks later, the dad called and he was like, sorry, my daughter is pregnant. Target knew before his daughter had even told him, just based on our shopping habits. So, these companies are getting this data and these information, these data points from you, but they're not necessarily numbers, but they are habits, they're trends. And then of course, Google can complete your search in a couple of letters. It creeps all of us out. You press A, L, and then all of a sudden you have exactly what you're looking for. It's data points. But you also have kind of an ability to keep these data points in your head. You just may not consider them data points. You know what roads to avoid during rush hour. If you have a dog, you know exactly when he's about to bark, and you can tell him to stop before he even opens his mouth. If for some of y'all that have kids, I know when I was teaching, I knew exactly how John would walk in and tell me how his day went yesterday. Fine. What'd you learn? I don't know. So these things, these are data points that they're just not numbers. But keep in mind that this is still data, and you still need to understand where it's coming from and what to do with it sometimes. So a question is, how can all these data points that we're collecting, right? How can they affect my decision making? And there's two different kinds of ways to make decisions, right? There's a data-informed way, and then there's a intuition-based way. And there's not one way is not necessarily better than the other. They really need to be worked in tangent with each other. So your data-informed decisions are backed by data, right? They kind of protect you. So if you'd make a decision based on the data and it goes south, you can point to the data and be like, well, I was basing it off of this data. Now, it could have gone wonky somewhere else in the process, but you have something to point it at, right? You have something to back up your decision. And think about it more as a solid foundation to build upon. Now, your intuition-based decisions, that's the going with your gut, right? It's relies on your past experiences, but it has a higher potential to be misleading because humans, once again, want to see patterns. So if you know something bad happened in the past, you are going to look for that in the future, because that's what humans do. Is they try. That's how we survived for so long, is that we recognize the negatives and those stick out in our minds. So that way we know to look for them in the future to protect ourselves. Well, now the negatives aren't snake bites, but the negatives are, bad decision at work or something that went awry. So go with your gut, listen, but verify. Trust your gut, but then make sure it's not just indigestion, right? My husband and I also have a thing where it's called trust but verify. If we're looking for something in the house, I'll ask him, did you look in the bedroom? And he goes, yeah. I will go back and look in the bedroom, and he's not upset because we work on a process of trust. Totally trust that you went into the bedroom and looked for it. I have no doubt, but I'm going to go back and verify. Work the same with your gut. Trust your gut, but then go verify and make sure that your gut is not leading you astray. Be careful of introducing biases or wrong conclusions based on what your gut is telling you. Start with your gut's idea and then use that data to back yourself up, to give yourself that foundation, to be able to point at something solid to why you've made your decision. When I was teaching, I came from a very low socioeconomic area for teaching, very high transience rates. Kids are moving in and out all the time, It was just it was a poor area of town. It was rough. And so if a kid came in March, my gut said that kid is at least one grade level behind, just based on past incidents, past kids. Usually a kid that's coming in March has either changed parents wherever they're living with. Mom and dad's lost a job. They've moved because of the military again. They got kicked out of their apartment. It's usually something negative is why they're coming in March. Usually parents that are that can have the capability. It's either beginning of the year or right after the semester change. So my gut says kids at least a grade level behind, but I don't rely solely on my gut, because if I did, I would start handing out, third grade level material. And I don't necessarily know that that's true. So instead I listen to my gut saying, okay, the kid's probably behind. And then I verify. I start giving out quizzes or tests. Can you add? Can you subtract? Can you multiply? What grade level are you actually on? So I use the data to back up my intuition. And then I lean on that data to, decide what to do with the kiddo. Okay, so let's kind of move on and switch gears and talk about what terms you need to know to kind of talk data. So like I said, there are terms that are kind of specific to your certain groups. So don't consider this as a be all end all definition. This is very broad. This is meant for everybody. And know that some terms might change based on what group you're in. Yeah, so make sure that you just know that it's not the be all end all. There are differences in some places. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is qualitative and quantitative. You might be like, yeah, I think I remember this back in high school. So qualitative is about qualities. It's the qualities of your data. It's also known as categorical because it's categorized. Typically, it uses words rather than numbers, but that's not always true. That's why it says typically. And it describes your qualities or your characteristics of your data. The one that I really like to use to try and decide whether it's qualitative or quantitative is, can you do arithmetic with it? Typically, you can't do arithmetic with qualitative data. So things like your student name, you can't add student names, student IDs. It's a number, but you can't really add. So you can count student IDs. I have 5 different ones, but you can't add student 1, 2, 3, 4 plus student 3, 4, 5, 6 and get something meaningful. College term description, these are all words that describe, your data that you're working with. Quantitative typically uses numbers more than words. It's measurable, it's very well defined, and you can do calculations with this. GPA itself is an average, but you can still find the average of the average. Number of earned credits, transferred credits. These are just quick, easy examples of qualitative. They're numbers, they're measurable. You can do arithmetic on it. It can be tricky sometimes. Like student ID, it's a number, but it's set in the qualitative. Age is a way to describe somebody, but it is quantitative because you can do arithmetic with it. It's, 29, you can find the average age. You can add up ages. And that might kind of float in between the two, depending on who you talk to. It's not set in stone, but it kind of gives you a broad idea of what to anticipate. Trend, general direction of your data points over time. So it's upwards, downwards. That's pretty much, it's pretty basic. This is a picture from one of our dashboards. And so it's talking about admissions over each month. And you can see this is an upward trend. The data is going upwards trend. Patterns. Okay, so these are data points that repeat in a predictable way. So this is a picture of our admissions over the course of a couple of years. So the numbers that end in a 4, 2194, 2204, those are our summer's terms. So you can see admissions drops in summer, not as many people apply in the summer, and then it picks back up in fall. So you can see this predictable trend there. All right, outliers. That is a data point that is way out there and is different from everybody else. That'd be if you were in a freshman engineering class filled with 18-year-olds and there was a 50-year-old lady that decided to go back in and start anew. Her age would be the outlier, okay? Because it'd be 18, 18, 18, 18, 50. If Elon Musk walked into this room right now, his salary would be the outlier because it would be just way out there compared to everybody else's. So it's the data point that doesn't fit. Okay. It's the one that's out there. A data set. So that's just a collection of data. In Ed Plus, we like to provide data sets in the form of tables. That way people can kind of manipulate and play with their data on their own. And this is just a nice benign picture of a sample data set that we might provide. Dashboards. So these are the fun ones. So dashboards are dynamic, which means it changes, interactive, and visual display of data. So dynamic means that as this data is updated, the dashboard is updated. So your data might update every day, and that dashboard is going to look different every day. It's interactive in the means that you can apply filters and you can make that dashboard look however you want based on whatever filters you apply. You can narrow it down to a specific time period, a specific group, or both. And then it also usually provides definitions at the bottom. It might not provide every definition you need, but it will provide some at least to give you some context to what this dashboard is looking at. A lot of these dashboards can be found on the analytics site, and we build dashboards, we being Ed Plus build dashboards as well to kind of help people visualize some of this data. Database. So this is an organized collection of data, and in the actual course, I would show the video, but the organized collection of data can be something like a phone book, organized collection of data, to your phone numbers list on your iPhone, still a database, or even in Ed Plus, our databases tend to be quite large and it's tables upon tables. It's a collection. Think about a virtual filing cabinet, essentially. Lots of tables in there. It can be very small, it can be massive, but when we get into the data storage module, we'll cover a lot more details on this. Remember, broad overviews. Okay, SQLs and queries. Okay, you'll hear SQL and queries. So SQL is pronounced SQL. Some people still say SQL, it's whichever. You'll hear this a lot when you're talking with data analysts or data scientists. So SQL is a programming language, and people might argue that it's not, but we're going to call it a programming language for the sake of simplicity. That allows people to find and manipulate data in a database without the means of a middleman, right? You don't need a graphical interface. You don't need Excel. You can talk directly to that database and grab what you're looking for without needing somebody to interpret for you, right? You're talking straight to the database. It's just like programming. When you're programming a software program, you don't need something in the middle to talk directly to the computer. Same thing with this in your database. The query is the written request, a query, right? Question. It's the written request that somebody makes with SQL to ask for that data. Now queries, this is a very short query in the picture. You know, they're summing the amount and they're pulling data out. They're giving it an alias or a name. They're grouping it and they're ordering it. That's a very short query. Some queries can be very, very, very long and very complicated just based on where you're pulling this data from. If you only want to look at one table, it can be relatively simple. But if you want to look at this table and this table and this table and this table, you have to grab them and join them in certain ways to make them kind of talk with each other and line up nicely. Because you don't want duplicates, you don't want lots of rows of the same thing or lots of rows where only one thing changes. So it can be very complicated and convoluted very quickly. So keep in mind when somebody talks about queries, this might be very simple, or it might be, you know, a couple months trying to make this work for them nicely. Population and sample. Okay, so this is important when talking about the different kinds of analytics we're going to talk about later on and the type of analytics that are performed. Population is every single thing or person in the group that you're looking at. A sample is a representative piece of that. So for example, if you were to ask every student in an elementary school something, it's possible that you could get all those answers. I think that maybe we did a couple of times. You could technically, in theory, ask every single student in an elementary school a question and get that. You could ask that population. But if you wanted to ask every single student in the United States a question, that's just not feasible. Time, money, attendance. It's just not going to happen. So what you do instead is you get a representative sample. And so the key is that your sample needs to be representative. If you have a huge bowl of red, green, and white M&Ms and your sample is only red M&Ms, that is not a representative sample. So the way to make it work is to make sure it's randomized and that you have people or things that represent your population as a whole. Okay, thinking about what types of data analytics are there, and then which ones do you need? Which ones should you ask for? Which ones have been applied to the things that you're looking at? So there are many kinds of analysis. We're going to look at two. We're just going to focus in on descriptive and predictive, just for the sake of simplicity. Descriptive is just what it sounds like. It describes that population you're looking at. And it answers the question, what happens? It gives you an idea of what happened in the past. It looks backwards. Predictive looks forwards. It answers the question, what could happen in the future? It's also known as inferential. So think about predictive. It predicts. Inferential, it makes inferences. So it looks towards the future. Once again, in the actual thing, we'd show the video, but this video, essentially, this is a high school teacher actually talking about high school statistics, and she's describing descriptive and inferential. And she's saying, if she looks at her grades and says, and she can see that 5 kids made an A, 6 kids made a B, 7 kids made a C, that would be descriptive, right? She could run an analysis on that and to see, the bell curve and see who did what, descriptive. But if it wanted to be inferential, she wanted to see how people would perform in the future, she would have to provide, get a much wider population and pick a representative sample and then run those analysis on that to see what would happen in the future. But they are two separate things. You can't necessarily predict the future based on the past, based on descriptive. So just kind of to recap, descriptive analytics. It looks at trends and patterns and relationships. It's good at communicating change over time. And it uses tools like that mean median mode that we'll cover later to describe the data. And it can identify if goals are being met, but not necessarily what goals should be created. It tells you if the goals have been met, though. There are limitations. So once again, you can't make predictions. If I'm beating a dead horse, it's important. You can't make predictions with descriptive. You can only make summation about the population that you are working with. So even if you do this calculation on this group of people, it can't necessarily be applied to this other group of people. You have to do your descriptive analytics on each one separately. And it can't show cause and effect. It can show relationships, but it can't show that all of these kids in this area failed this class because blah. You can just show that these kids in this area failed this class, okay? Now, predictive analytics. So once again, it uses the sample rather than the entire population. Hopefully that your sample is representative. It uses that sample to make predictions and draw conclusions. And then sometimes machine learning and statistical analysis can be involved. We'll talk much more in depth about machine learning later, but you might hear things like confidence intervals or standard deviation. And just know that, they all kind of go hand in hand, and we'll get into more depth later. Predictive analytics in real life, exit polling, market research. So in exit polls, they do not interview every single person walking out of every single exit poll all across the country all at once. Instead, they pick certain exit polls that they hope are being a representative sample of the entire population, and then make predictions based on that. In Ed Plus, some predictive analytics might be enrollment predictions, or predicting how many classes or how many seats I should open up next term or next session. We can make predictions using predictive analytics. Oh, and just the 4 out of 5 dentists. I mean, of course, they did not interview every single dentist across the US. They picked a sample and they asked them and they did that. Interesting enough, though, that is, we'll talk about misleading statistics in another module. That is actually a misleading statistic. What they do when they interview those dentists is they give them a big list and they say, just bubble in all the ones that you would recommend. And so they're not saying they would recommend Crest over anything else. They would just, sure, Crest is just as good as anything else. So we'll talk more about these interesting ways to kind of manipulate your data and be misleading and how to avoid that in your own. Okay, limitations of predictive analytics. It relies on the accuracy of the sample. Once again, I know I'm beating a dead horse on that, but it's a really important piece. Also, predictions are not 100% accurate. Humans are weird and hard to predict. 3 years ago, we could have made predictions about the number of seats to open on our online courses, and we would have been completely and totally wrong because who would have predicted a global pandemic? So once again, you can do your best, but there's always going to be something that will prevent your analytics from being 100% accurate. Because like I said, humans are weird and hard to predict. There are many, many variables. And once again, we'll go into more detail later when we get to the actual predictive analytics side. Okay, so just to kind of wrap it up, hopefully you kind of have an idea of what it means to be data literate. You kind of have an idea of what data is found inside and outside of ASU. You have an idea about some of your data specific terminology. Once again, the goal was not to memorize that, but just be acquainted with it. Kind of like an actor in a movie. You can recognize the face, but you don't necessarily know the name. Recognize it, be acquainted with it. And then just a very brief overview of those descriptive and predictive analysis. We will go into more detail on these things in later modules. This was more just a very broad overview to kind of give an idea of what's coming up and what to anticipate and what to expect. There are additional resources to dive into at the end of every module as well. So if anything just really tickled your fancy, or if you wanted to learn more about something or wanted to dive into the creepy Target ads, those are all there for y'all to dig into. There is an end of module survey. So if y'all want to do that, by all means, but also if you want to join the Ed Plus focus group and provide feedback there, if you want to shoot me an email or a Slack message, I appreciate any kind of criticism or constructive criticism. Like I told my fifth graders, be kind about it, but be blunt too. I need to know the goods and the bads. And then these are examples of our additional resources that we have as well. Do y'all have any, I kind of talked fast, I guess, but do y'all have any questions or thoughts? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, my name's Caitlin Stevens. I'm with Ed Plus, the Ed Plus data analysis team. I apologize. I kind of just dove right in, didn't I? All of Ed Plus, hopefully. So this would, hit success coaches, anybody, admissions, anybody that wanted to take this that felt like they could benefit from having a little bit more of a handle on data literacy. Would love for it to go out to even just the wider audience, to the university, whoever felt like this would be something that's useful, but definitely data citizens and below realm of things. Yes, we are going to post all this on Career Edge. So that way it will be available to whoever it strikes their fancy and whatever teams feel like they could benefit from it as well. That depends on, so the question was for the people online, is there like a number or percentage that would be considered sufficient to do an analysis on? And it really depends on, it depends. Yeah. That's kind of our data analysis kind of catchphrases. It depends. If you're looking at, the university as a whole, then you're going to want a pretty big sample size. If you're looking at a class that just started up, you kind of are limited with what kind of numbers you can work with, but you might still work with that and let people know kind of there's an asterisk there. Yeah, we have this, but we're working with a limited amount of data. So keep in mind that this might be, less accurate than later on in the future. But it kind of just depends on what your overall population size and what data you have available to you. Yeah, it depends on what you're doing as well. It just kind of depends. Do y'all have a thought on that data analysis team? And my front row is my data analysis team. Yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense. So if you are capable, then absolutely use all of them. And 1,000's very reasonable to be able to get those responses versus, a couple of tens of thousands. And we actually have a really nice Slack. We have a couple of different Slack channels that those more kind of advanced questions can be directed to. We have Talk Data to Me. And we have Where's That Data as well on both on Slack. And that'd probably promote a really nice discussion actually for a lot of different teams to talk about what their thoughts on it are. Because like I said, it depends, and you're going to get a different thought process based on what group you're in and what they're kind of used to dealing with. So yeah, I think that would promote a very, very nice discussion. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So for the people online, the question was, can an everyday user do these predictive analysis, or is it something that you kind of need to reach out to somebody else for? We actually have a couple of teams that is their thing, is they do predictive analysis. And some teams have a person that is their predictive analysis go-to person. And your safest bet is to go towards those predictive analysis teams or people. They know what models to use. They know what limitations, they know all the nuances and the asterisks that might pop up. Now, that's not to say there's not things that you can play around with, but I personally wouldn't use that officially. If you're familiar with Alteryx has, machine learning and things that you can play around with, but I would kind of bounce that off of people whose jobs is to do that, just because they might know more about the nuances and the ins and outs than maybe Alteryx is willing to give you, just as Alteryx, the program. Yes. Yeah. This is more of this thing exists, not so much a go and try this. Well, at least as far as predictive. Descriptive, by all means, go and try this. And that's going to be the goal in the later modules, especially with like Excel and data usage, is doing mean, median, mode, figuring out the characteristics of your data. And then that's going to be the more go forth and try, but the predictive is more like this thing exists. Go, later on, maybe we'll touch on it for sure. Yes. And Shelley brings up a good point. It does allow you to be critical. So when you see something, you go, I know just enough to be dangerous. And I know just enough to ask enough questions to maybe make them ponder and make them know that I'm a discerning audience rather than a blindly spoon-fed person. No, not necessarily. So here in kind of the examples I gave, yes, but this I'm hoping is to be broad enough to be used, wherever. I mean, watching the local news channel and seeing the data, knowing the questions, and like Shelley said, being skeptical, knowing what questions to ask and knowing where this data might come from. So hopefully at least the broad ideas can be applied outside of ASU, but generally those examples I'm going to be giving are ASU specific. All right. I'll let y'all sneak out early, but thank y'all, and consider doing the survey if y'all want to, or joining our focus group, but thank y'all. I appreciate it.